Hi, I'm Tim Buchanan.
And I'm Rick Redding.
And boy, does the controversy just keep boiling and things get hotter and hotter. And it's an area that I've worked in a lot in my life. I've spent a career in ministry, and boy, you want to find a hotbed of anger and one-sided opinions and conflict and power struggles. Man, go to your local church and you'll find it. And the number of casualties is just staggering. So, in having consulted with churches in Canada and the United States many times that were in these conflicts over the years, and working at the MBA level as an affiliate faculty, I've done a lot of work and I've created a lot of resources in the area of how these conflicts come up, and of course they're just continuing to roll right now. And I know Rick is kind of stressed about it all too.
Well, I don't know about stress, probably for sure. Fired up, absolutely. And I'm on that pendulum going all the way from one side being mad as a hornet to the other side saying, Lord, please forgive me.
Well,
so really, Tim, we need solutions. That's what people are looking for.
Yeah, and more than anything, my heart in this is just sadness. It makes me sad to see what's happening, and how it just continues to grow and go completely unabated. In one of my books that I'm reading now, and I read a lot of books in this area, and I first want to apologize to the author. I'm not going to mention the author's name, lest the author thinks I've used what they said to leverage a point that I want. So to this author, if you hear this and you recognize your work, I apologize. And if you come back and say, no, tell the whole world that's mine, I will. But here's what it says. And it's a book about resolving issues and problems that are ongoing. And it says, he's talking about having to be collaborative. And then he says, this next part is crucial. Good solutions meet two criteria. They must be realistic, meaning both parties can reliably do their part of the solution, and mutually satisfactory, meaning the concerns of both parties will truly and logically be addressed. So don't sign off on any solution without giving consideration to whether it's realistic and mutually satisfactory. And I agree with that, and that's the problem that people fall into. We have a session that's going to be coming up when I talk more, and we'll give some visuals on how organizations get hijacked and how people implement a scorched earth type approach when they don't get what they want. And in that, what I see is that when someone begins to act unreasonably, that doesn't mean that they don't have any reason to act, but the way in which they're acting is unreasonable. Sadly, reasonable people become unreasonable in order to try and calm this person down, and everything dissolves. An example was a student I had that worked for a major corporation, and they had a meeting, and there was a person in this meeting that always just went off whenever anyone shared an idea. I mean, they just went, and they got angry and interrupted and started degrading them and their idea and everything. And so this person asked me, well, how do I deal with that? And I said, well, how do you normally deal with it? And she said, well, I don't know what to do. I don't want to make a scene in the meeting. And I just later go to the person that got degraded and criticized, and I just apologized to this person. And I said, so in other words, you're just letting the problem go on. And she said, well, not exactly. It's the other person. I said, no, it's your meeting. You're in charge of it. And you're letting everybody in that room pay the price for your failure to exert some reasonable behavior in this. And she agreed, yes, that was her responsibility and is actually going on. So I asked her, whose meeting was it? Was this person a peer, superior, or a report? She said, well, they're a peer. I said, well, then what's the company's policy on this? She says, well, since I call the meeting, even though they're a peer, I am in charge of the meeting. It is my meeting. And I said, okay, here's what you do. And this was a weekly meeting. So, I mean, just got to the point where she got knots in her stomach every time she had to go to this meeting. And I said, okay, here's what you do for the meeting this week. You go to this person and you say, if you do that again this week, I'm going to give you a warning to stop it. If it happens the second time, I'm going to remove you from the meeting. Do you understand what I'm saying? And so there was no response. She went to the meeting, and sure enough, it happened again, and she gave him a warning. The second time he did it, she asked him to leave the meeting, and she was scared to death to do it, but she did it. She said then later that day, she was going down the hallway and saw him coming towards her, and he crossed the hall and started walking right up to her. And she said, she thought, oh boy, he's just going to unload on me and let me have it. And so she kind of braced herself. He walked right up to her and said, I want to talk to you about what you did to me in the meeting today. She said, oh, okay. He said, I just wanted to tell you, you were right to do that, and I'll never act that way again. And he left. And so it wasn't ever going to get solved until she quit being unreasonable to appease him or to dodge the situation. And she began to think about it reasonably. And I feel we're really in a state of that today. What do you think, Rick?
Well, he was reasonable, actually, for being a fire starter, for, with everything. We're living in a day right now that you and I can remember because we're old enough, clear back into the 60s and 70s, when there was all kinds of turmoil in the streets. And this, to me, this is even worse what's going on right now. It's total anarchy and chaos, and there's no reasonable adults there. There's no, you talk about consequences, but Tim, I wanted to just turn the table in the day that we're living in right now. And leaders are going to see this in their classroom, in their organization, in their businesses. There's going to be some unreasonable people at those meetings. And so when that gal said, okay, I'm talked to him beforehand and said, if you act up once, I'll warn you. And the next time I'll ask you to leave the meeting. Well, it sounds kind of like, some meetings between parents and children. And, I never had much luck reasoning with my children, because it was kind of managing cats and it was chaos. I couldn't let one get out of line. And so I just think the error there sometimes is assuming that the other party is reasonable, because today she would have asked that person to leave the room and he would have said, no, I'm not. And he would have caused a fuss right there. So then how does she de-escalate that instead of allowing it to escalate? Because that's really what leaders are going to see, I think.
Well, that's part of the issue which we have right now, which was from this book, which I was reading also, is that you have to have boundaries, and you have to understand there's a couple of different things involved here. One, you have to understand when someone's being completely unreasonable, which this individual was. They were unreasonable in treating other people this way. They just gave full rein to their anger. The other thing you have to be able to discern is when someone has a reasonable point, but they're trying to approach it in an unreasonable way or an inappropriate way. In other words, they don't respect any boundaries in the way in which they approach a problem. And then finally, when someone has a legitimate point and it's time to call it out, and a lot of that is the difference between what I call a destroyer and a builder. And we're gonna have a copy of this for you to download, but I just want to read these two. And then we'll talk about it some more. But the destroyer will take any convenient issue and dramatize it until you're horrified in a way to make you feel victimized, which leads to someone being demonized. So you're easy to mobilize against a person or group to terrorize them and ostracize them unless they fold and allow the destroyer to have all the power. The key elements in the destroyer are anger, division, violence, drama, and shame. As opposed to that, someone that's a builder. The builder will urge everyone to listen and employ reason to help each other understand the issue in a respectful way and encourage everyone to participate with a hopeful attitude leading to a shared solution which brings everyone together where we can all benefit. And the key elements are understanding, community, peace, reason, and respect. And we have problems in this world. We have serious problems. We will always have. And I think we've always had people that are destroyers. Part of the problem today is that in our culture, if anyone sets up reasonable boundaries, if anyone sets up some boundaries that says, you know, we can have a discussion, but these particular actions in that discussion won't be allowed, then it's like this person is an enemy of the solution, and they're not. They're actually the builder. Things more than often boil down to power, and there's always a collapse in that being done in a healthy way, which I personally think that we have a huge collapse of that in our nation today, of healthy and reasonable leadership on every level. And everything becomes about victimization and demonizing other people and ostracizing them. We no longer can have disagreements. And, you know, I'd say when it comes to disagreement, Rick, you and I are probably experts at it because we've disagreed for 35, 40 years on things. And, you know, being divisive doesn't get us anywhere. And being unreasonable doesn't get us anywhere. So, you know, I think that we need to understand the difference between someone's being a destroyer and call them on that. And again, not acting like them and ostracizing them, but trying to move them to a point where they're part of the solution, that they can be engaged in the builder mentality instead of the destroyer mentality.
Well, Tim, I mean, I love what you said here, and it makes all kinds of sense to me. But going back to that situation that young lady was in, you know, and I take it back to that step, you know, if there's an unreasonable person there in the midst of them in their workspace or their classroom or whatever, how do you, again, you know, do you just say, okay, you're a destroyer, and so, you know, we're gonna cancel class right now, and or just should get up and walk away? How can we bring that thing back? Because consequences are based on something, right? I mean, maybe it's a shared belief in mutual respect one for the other, you know. But again, I think we've assumed that that's there. I don't think that's there anymore. I don't think that foundation is there. It's not. It hasn't been taught at home. Hasn't been taught in the schools. It isn't being taught in the you know, maybe not taught, but supported in the workspace. You know, what's the practical application of what you're talking about in that situation?
Well, a couple of things in that. You know, we got behind the curve on realizing that basic core values aren't taught in the home anymore, and therefore the backup plans, which are education and other areas, didn't get up to speed fast enough. I guess as far as the other issue of how we move them from destroyer to builder, I learned a really good lesson when I got my pilot's license 35 years ago. I was trying to learn how to fly what they call a taildragger airplane, where it had two wheels up front and one in the back, and the back was down on the ground. And they're kind of old style. Not many people are very familiar with them. And I had bought one and was learning to fly it. And the funny thing about them is that a normal airplane, when you go down the runway taking off or landing, it's like pulling a piece of string across a table. With a tail dragger, it's like trying to push that piece of string, because the back end always wants to get around in front of the front end. And it's something you got to learn to handle, and you do it by flying with your feet and keeping the thing straight. Well, I was trying to learn how to take off, and when you take off a little airplane, there's a lot of torque that wants to kind of pull the airplane to the side, and I was trying to keep it on the center line. I'd go way over here, and then I'd overcorrect, and I'd go way over here, and I'd way over here, and I think I was making my instructor seasick in the back seat, and so he let me struggle with it several times, and then finally he said, Tim, now we're going to do it different this time. We got down the end of the runway, ready to take off. He says, here's what I want you to do this time. He said, when it starts to go off to the side, he said, instead of trying to bring it all the way back, he says, all I want you to do is stop it from going the wrong direction. He says, don't worry about getting it back to the middle. Just stop it from going the wrong direction. He said, then when you've accomplished that, start easing it back over and get it where you want it to be. And I found that very valuable advice in a lot of areas of life is that we try and almost give people whiplash. We want them to come all the way over here immediately from where they're at. And often the first step is just stop the destructive behavior. Just stop things from going the wrong way. And everybody's sitting down and saying, you know what we're doing right now isn't working. I've probably used that phrase a million times in my life. People will tell me a story and they'll tell me how they approached a problem, and I'll just ask, well, how's that working for you? And they'll say, well, it's not working at all. And then I'll say, well, then why do you keep doing it that way? Let's stop doing that and try and find something new and different. And so, yeah, I think we stop things from moving the wrong direction, and then we start easing it back the other way. But we've got to recognize a couple of things. So we've got to recognize one when it's going the wrong way. We're not going to make anything better by just saying, well, you know, we have to be understanding and just keep letting it go the wrong way. If I'm in a car and I'm a passenger and the driver is steering us to the ditch, I'm going to do something. I'm going to say something. I'm going to reach over and grab the wheel and get us. I'm not just going to sit there and watch a wreck, but yet in life we do that. And the other thing we have to understand is there are some people, very few, but there are people that they're what I call organizational psychopaths. They don't care if they blow the whole place up. They don't care if they blow the community up. They don't care what they tear up. They're going to have it all, or nobody's going to have anything. And that is the true destroyer. And we have to realize the people that are that, and they don't come to the table being reasonable. They don't come to the table wanting a solution. They only come to the table wanting a win-lose situation. They win, everybody else loses, and that's the only solution they want. So we have to recognize those things.
Well, you know, it reminds me of a couple of situations that occurred to me this week. You know, one with my son Joshua, and him and I were having we're sort of crossing swords basically, you know, on these the issues that we're talking about right now. And you know, I love my kids, and they're my heroes. And you know, Joshua, you know, he's getting his PhD right now, and he is a really smart kid, and he's got a tender heart. You know, I'm still kind of pretending to be the dad on some things and trying to force my way through some of these things. And, you know, I forgot about respect. And, you know, I said a few things that I really wish I hadn't have said, and it hurt him, and it came back and really hurt me because it kind of severed our communication for a while. And it's really anchored in love. And so I provoked my son, you know, and again, I think it was Tim, you know, because I always want to bring this thing back to values, people, purpose. You know, that's what we're here for. And about your workbook, because I was a teacher and a parent with 5 kids, and you know, those things mean something. I think they need to be returned to the classroom, absolutely. But I think we can salvage what we've got and really build upon it. But we need to start from that. Don't assume anything. But you know, I need to respect their position, and vice versa. And that's where I think we can come together with that. And you be proud of me, because the other situation was an old friend of mine who was African American from Baltimore that we played football together in North Dakota in college. and both defensive backs. And, he's called me a mentor to him at times. I haven't been a very good mentor, honestly. But I exampled Christ to him in college, and it impacted his life. And we haven't talked in 30 years, and we just recently reconnected. And he's a flaming liberal, and I'm a flaming conservative, and yet we love each other, but we have to remind each other that. But we walked through some really difficult conversations over Facebook about this situation, and we found our way through. And it reminded me, he respects me, I respect him. I just got to do it with everybody. And so I just think it's that foundational thing that you're offering, actually. That's one of the reasons I'm doing this, not because I love you and you're my best buddy, but because I really think you've got something that everybody needs in every situation. Every leader's going to have to fall back on those things and not just assume they're there, but put them into practical reality.
Well, and we've got to, like I said, not just listen. We've got to have a little bit of reason in this. We've got to understand that there are destroyers on both sides of every argument, and there's builders on both sides of every argument. And as destroyers, it's a very us versus them, whatever the situation. And the builder, they help build hope that we can disagree, but still come up with a solution that works for everybody. And there are reasonable collaborations that can take place. It takes time, and sometimes it takes tragedies to get us off dead center to move towards new collaborations that we may need. But one of the things that everybody is really stressed about right now is the over dramatization of a lot of things. It comes from the politicians, and it comes from the news media, because latching on to that, it can be leverage for power in the politicians, and it can be leverage for ratings in the news media. And that's a very selfish interest that they have. And I think that we sell ourselves short. I've always told my MBA students the first night of class, biggest mistake they'll ever make in their lives is selling themselves short. And quite honestly, you've got people in every different area and group that seeks to be divided today on both sides of the fence. I mean, it's all mixed up. It's all over. And, I don't know where this will lead, but I think and I hope that those that are listening to this will start picking up some things that they can at least use in their own life, at home, in their own company, and begin to realize that there are always going to be people who come along and try and ruin a good thing. There are people that are always going to come along and take tragedy and try and leverage it for their own purposes. And that what we need to do is we need to be the builder, and we need to look for the other builders. And we need to get over this thing of focusing on the volume and look reasonably at who's really involved. Most often, the most vocal people in things are those that are standing alone to do it. And they've convinced everyone else. I mean, there's some real tricks these people will use, the destroyers. I mean, I've seen them in churches so many times. They use phrases like, well, everybody agrees, or everybody thinks, everybody's saying. And of course, today we see whole companies just caving in on things because of this type of rhetoric. And it's not true if you get out there and you start asking people. And I've had that happen to me for years. I'll have somebody come to me and say, well, everybody in church, this or that. And I'll say, well, give me an example. Give me one name. Well, I don't want to name any names. So I just go around and start a conversation with everybody. And I come back and say, you know what? I've talked to everybody. Can't find anybody that feels that way. Where are you getting your information? And at that point, I realized that a person is just not that way. I mean, we've got this. It really saddens me as a culture. We've got this issue of somebody spouts off or says something inappropriate or says something that was maybe just their opinion, but they got accused of being inappropriate. The only solution is to totally crush them or their business or their life. That's not working on anything. I mean, these people will come back to the plate and say, I'm sorry, I made a mistake. Even if maybe they didn't, they're willing for the sake of their company or good relationships to fall on their sword and say, you know, I'm sorry that I shouldn't have said that. And it doesn't make any difference. I mean, it alarms me when we have a culture that says, well, then, you know what? Tough stuff. We don't care if you're sorry or not. You're done. You're out of here. We'll wreck you. And that's the only answer that we'll take is your penance. And that's not our country, and that's not how we want to be. And that's not how the builder is. The builder says, hey, you know what? Been there myself, said some things I shouldn't have, shot my mouth off in the heat of the moment, you know, let my emotions get the better of me. And hey, it's okay. Come on back in and let's work this out together. We need everybody's voice here. And I think that's something that we need to work with. We cannot make it about fault and blame. We make it about fault and blame, is going to crumble. I see people destroying marriages. I see people destroy friendships and everything else because they want to make it about fault and blame. And that seems to be the direction our culture goes in today. And that's absolutely what our educators are teaching is fault and blame, fault and blame. And it's not. It goes back to what you were saying. We no longer teach personal responsibilities. You know, I need to respect other people. I need to have some empathy with other people. I need to understand that I haven't walked a mile in their shoes. So maybe I need to sit for a little while and listen and hear what that's like. And then go hear all the other opinions that are involved in it. But yeah, I mean, we need builders today more than anything.
Yeah, I was just looking at your list of your 12 values there, and the first one that popped out to me was self-control. You know, I'm 65 years old. You'd think I could practice a little self-control in my life, and then I get so passionate about something, and I forget about my dad and I. You know, and I think there's a whole lot of folks out there that you know have had similar experiences, and I let it get so bad when I was a kid growing up, and my dad came from a different perspective, but not unlike what Joshua and I are going, and my kids and I are going through right now, and everybody's going through. You know, it's kind of goes back to your upbringing, but you know, I allowed it to completely destroy my relationship with my father. You know, to the point I'm so ashamed to say it, but when he was on his deathbed, and I was a committed Christian, you know, and I was, you know, in my 40s or 50s. I mean, we're pretty close, and you know, Mr. Christian. And I told my family I didn't even want to go out because I knew that we hadn't taken care of a few things, you know, and he needed to tell me he loved me and ask forgiveness, and I wasn't going to give it to him. And so, you know, my older sister, you know, she finally came and grabbed me by the ear and said, "You're coming, and I'm going to pay for the ticket, and we're going to go out there, and you and Dad are going to spend some time together because he might not make it over the next 48 hours." And he didn't. And I got there, and you know, he wasn't able to talk, but we heart to heart we communicated, and I was there and had my hands on him and prayed with him when he gave up the ghost and went to be with the Lord. And so it was like, thank you. You know, we've settled this. And, you know, that's, again, reasonable things. You know, there's solutions here that will positively impact both parties. But we've got to be able to sit down and do that. But again, you know, the shared values, I just have to go back and I assume that we are all there. I mean, and as leaders, we assume, you know, you're picking, imagine that, you know, not just a classroom, but an organization, or organizations like people are coming together. A business where you're having to hire people from all different, you know, backgrounds, you know, you're just assuming that we all come from the same thing. And, you know, we exhibit self-control and responsibility and patience and honesty and courage and respect. And, you know, we forget that we don't. And so we need to be patient with each other. And I'm just saying, I'm at times the destroyer, and at other times, you know, when the Lord taps me on the shoulder, and then he brings me back. And I am a builder, and I am an encourager. And those are the gifts that God's given me that I don't practice enough.
Well, and I think something that bothers me so deeply is what an apology doesn't mean anything today other than I won and you lost. Now go away. And there's all this talk about justice. Justice isn't justice if there's no grace involved in it. And I see so many people today that they just they in spite of an apology or anything, they just cut people off and they won't talk to him. And that's just a form of punishment. They're just punishing the other person. They're having no grace with them. Justice involves reconciliation. Justice involves healing. And it just really troubles me that we live in a world today where we don't see the grace on either side. We don't see the justice, the reconciliation. What we see is we just see more anger and division and violence from everybody. And it's not going to get us anywhere, and we're not going to find the solutions in that. All we're going to do is hurt ourselves more. And that's why I think it's so important that we have builders today, and that the builders go out to the destroyers and invite them to and say, hey, this can be a reasonable discussion. I've had it where the destroyers have said, yeah, I'm kind of out of line here in the way I'm dealing with this. Yeah, I'll come sit at the table and we'll do this in a graceful way together. I've had other destroyers that say, nope, you know what? It's my way 100% or nothing. And if I don't get my way, I'll tear this place down. And to take a stand, I've been in situations where then they tore the place down and I had to watch it. But I wasn't going to give the whole organization to a destroyer just to make them happy. That's something that they have to account for and live with. But we never stop inviting them to come and sit down. But especially people in positions of leadership have to understand the difference. And we can't trust our politicians for that, because all politicians, they want approval because approval means votes. They want to be on the most popular side that they envision any situation is. And they're not about bringing people together. They're about keeping them divided. And that's just how it is. And that's nothing new. It's always been that way. I mean, go back and read Mark Twain's writing. Go back and research Grant and the Civil War. I mean, these political things have always been like that. And, we can't trust the CEOs because their bottom line is making money for shareholders. And if them taking a reasonable position will cost them money, then they're not going to be allowed to do it. And so, we need to start at home. We need to start in our businesses, and we need to start having the mindset of a builder that has collaborative solutions that are just, that are reasonable, that are enduring, that brings everybody to the table, and even people at the onset that we view as the bad guys. There's always a villain, an antagonist, and a protagonist in the story that we're trying to tell about this, and we bring them all to the table. And we realize usually when we do that, we all do want the same thing. And we have all the resources between us to get there, but it'll never be done in the camp of the destroyer, and it'll never be done when we're held hostage by anyone about anything, and it'll never take place when it's an all or nothing proposal. It has to be done by the builder who is understanding, wants peace and community, reason, and respect, and that's where we need to go towards.
Well, maybe bringing it back to some of the tools that folks can use that we have an investment in. You've written so many books over these last 40 years. Just when you're talking about the builder, I remember the Barn Builder that you wrote. I remember that 3-book series. The Apprentice. What was the Craftsman? The Journeyman and the Craftsman. The Candlestick Wars. There's a lot of, I've spent more time in my Bible and with my Constitution, because things are affecting me at those levels over the past week. sometimes to justify my own position, but sometimes I go, wow, I missed that one, and so I think folks are looking for tools, Tim, and maybe you could spend just a couple minutes before we cut this off, just to give them an idea where they could pick up some of these tools that they could use in their own situation.
Well, like I said, we have some of these things that are downloadable. We usually have a downloadable graph or something with each video we have here. And so I hope you'll download those, use them, look at them, think about them, start a discussion in your sphere of influence about them. We have our character books on Amazon. The first book is out there. The Candlestick Wars, which is a relational business book, that's on Amazon. A lot of the books we've used internally, and some of them are around our Teachers Pay Teachers material that we do. But all of it revolves around values, people, and purpose. And we want people to sit down. We want them to stop fighting. We all need to get a grip on our anger, our fear, and move towards hope here, and one by one step up and say, I want to be a builder. I don't want any more harm to come to this. I want to be a builder that makes this a better place, makes this more just, makes it more reasonable, and everybody willing to come to the table and saying, hey, this can be better. This isn't as good as it gets. And we can move forward. We can make things more positive, and we can all, instead of pointing our finger at the next person, start really looking inward and saying, what are my responsibilities, and how do I begin to live that out in a better way?
I love it, Tim. I think that's what we're trying to accomplish here. So just bring them back to values, people, and purpose.
And we're all going to disagree. We're all going to have a different approach. And but as long as we're willing to continue to respect each other, as long as we're willing to continue to keep the dialogue open, even when we get grumpy about something, that's how we get there. And we've got to remember that we've all got to collaborate together, not compromise, but collaborate and really work to come up with something that's very good. And I believe that we can do that. And I believe the greatest mistake we'd ever make is leaving it in the hands of the politicians. Let's step up to the plate, one neighborhood at a time, one home at a time. Just start working to build it to something better instead of tearing it down. So best of luck in this. We'd love to hear your comments. Please subscribe so you can hear more. We just want to start the conversation. We hope that you'll share your comments with us. Even if you're a destroyer, go ahead and blast away. We'll read it, and we'll consider it, and we'll thoughtfully respond to it. So for Values, People, and Purpose, I'm Tim Buchanan.
And I'm Rick Redding.
Have a wonderful day.